In this video we are going to be looking at solving fractional indices. So we're going to look at things like 16 to the power of a half, we're going to look at 27 to a third, and then perhaps to a fourth, and so on. So let's begin. So let's start with 16 to the power of a half. And I want you to bear with me a second because I'm going to explain why I'm doing it this way. I'm going to have 16 to the power of a half times 16 to the power of a half. And by looking back at the first rule of indices, when we multiply, we add the powers. So a half plus a half, that makes 1. So we have 16 to the power of 1. Now I don't really need that 1 there because it's the same thing as just saying 16. So I'm just going to take it off. Now what we have here is we have a number. If you've noticed, this number is exactly the same as this number here. Now what other number can we think of that when it's multiplied by itself makes 16? And the only number we could think of is 4, because 4 times 4 is 16. So what this means is that this 16 to the power of a half is the same thing as saying 4. So in other words, 16 power of a half makes 4. So then what's the relationship? How do we go from 16 to 4? What operation do we use? And the only way is by square rooting. So we can say 16 to the power of a half is the same thing as the square root of 16, because that makes 4. Now let's have a look at another example. Let's have a look at, say, 36 to the power of a half. Again, we can have 36 power of a half times 36 half, and half plus a half, that makes 1 whole, so it's just 36. Again, what number multiplied by itself makes 36? And the only one we can think of is 6. So that makes 36. So in other words, 36 to the power of a half is the same thing as saying 6. So again, the only way of going from 36 to 6 is by square rooting. And I've just realized I've been saying 666 like 300 times already. So 30, I think it's a bad example to use 36 here. So 36 to the power of a half is the same thing as the square root of 36 again. Okay, so we can solve these kind of questions by only having to go through 2 steps. So the rule is that whenever you have something, say m to the power of a half, then it's the same thing as saying the square root of m. Now some people tend to write a little 2 here to show that it's the square root. But in this case, I'm not going to write 2, but I will come back to it because we are going to have to write something in there quite soon. So I'm just going to get rid of it now. So that's just a square root. Now let's move on and have a look at other fractional indices. So this time we're going to look at having something to the power of a third. Now in this case we're going to have 8 to the third times 8 to the third times 8 to the third. Again, we add the powers, so third plus a third plus a third, that makes 1 whole. Okay, don't need to write the 1. Now the reason why I times by itself 3 times is because I need to get 1 whole, and I can only do so by multiplying it by itself, so 3 times. So again, what number multiplied by itself makes 8? And that's 2. 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. So again, what's the link? how do we go from 8 to a third? Oops, 3. How do you go from there to 2? And the only conclusion we could come up with is if we cube root 8. So in other words, that is the same thing as saying the cube root of 8. And this is where you have that little 3 there to show that it's the cube root of 8. Okay, because 2 times 2 times 2 makes 8. Right, let's have a look at another example. So say this time we have 27 to the power of a third, and you've probably by now figured it all out. I'm just going to do it for the sake of it. So, whoops, 27 to a third times 27. Whoops. Oh, I'm making a lot of mistakes this time. 27 to a third, and that makes 27. So again, what number multiplied by itself 3 times makes 27? And that's 3. 3 times 3 times 3, that makes 27. So what's the link here? Again, we are cube rooting, so we can say 27 to the power of 3 or of a third is the same thing as the cube root of 27. Okay, and that makes 3. So we can solve it again by these 2 simple steps there. So the rule is, and you can write it down, is whenever we have something, so say m to the power of a third, we can work it out by finding the cube root of m. Now you've probably spotted the pattern here that when we have, just going to go back, when we have something to the power of a half, we square root, and we have something to the power of a third, we cube root, which means that when we have something to the power of a fourth or a quarter, then we just take the fourth root of it, or the quadruple root, if you want to call it that. So that'll be, so think of a number multiplied by itself 4 times to make 16, and that is 2. So this applies for other fractional indices. So if you had something to the power of a fifth, then you would take the fifth root, and then the sixth root, and so on and so forth. Now in the next video we are going to be looking at fractional indices, but this time we're going to be looking at things like 2/3, we're going to be looking at things like 32, say, to the power of 3/5, how to go about solving that, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you in the next video.